Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today.
Welcome to Open Market, a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry. I'm Joe Zappa, and I'm joined by the king of Staten Island, Eric Franchi, and the sharpest-tongued CEO in adtech, Wetzel.
So kind. Hi, thanks so much for having me. And now I know the answer, who hails from Staten Island versus the other one is Long Island. So Joe, you're Long Island.
That's right. Some of us have class and some of us pick up trash.
What did I do to you today?
This is the Lord episode, so you know we're throwing some barbs, some salvos to be exchanged.
I hail from Baltimore, and actually I posted something on Twitter because I said I'm an Orioles fan who went to my very first Mets game at Citi Field last night, which was beautiful and a great experience, and with actually a lot of diehard Mets fans. And some folks on Twitter have actually already slid into the DMs to say, this is amazing. You're 410 Baltimore. Like, that's great. So I think it does either one or two things. It's either that someone appreciates, I'm hailing from the Charm City and it's some sort of affinity for Baltimore, or it's like they're now afraid of me and I have some sort of like street cred and thanks to The Wire. So either way, I'm going to play it. And I am very Baltimore born, bred, and proud.
Yeah, I was going to say, having seen The Wire, I don't know that the first thing of which I would associate Baltimore's charm, but you're doing your best to amend that reputation. Don't come for me, Baltimore people.
All right, let's get into it. So this is the first pod that Lauren has recorded as CEO, new CEO of InfoSum. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
We've long been fans of you and the company, and we wanted to have a little bit of a different conversation and talk about your career and how one lands as the CEO of one of the hottest companies in ad tech. So maybe we'll start a little bit pre-InfoSum, if that sounds good to you, even pre-AppNexus.
Yeah, I love that.
So, Lauren, you've always been in and around digital. I think you were at Razorfish and you're at Freewheel as well, but then also had a lot of years as a management consultant. So why don't you tell us about the sort of origin of your career in and around digital advertising, and then how you ended up becoming chief of staff at AppNexus/Xandr?
Yeah, I think my first foray first it was an intern, and then I did 2 years at what was called Avenue A Razorfish in Philadelphia while in undergrad, which is amazing because almost everyone you meet in this industry has had like some sort of 4-day Razorfish or Sapient or some flavor of it. And it was when it was owned by Microsoft. And I think for me, it was sort of services I liked, and this notion of the convergence of digital and advertising and everything that had to offer in terms of the relationship with the consumer was super fascinating and interesting to me. I had a mentor who said, we would love to have you at Razorfish full time, once you graduate, but you should really go into consulting, which was sort of interesting having a mentor and someone who would be a future boss say that. But I'm eternally grateful because I kind of always share with folks thinking about navigating their career. And I also think a huge stepping stone for me into both chief of staff and now today as chief executive. I think management consulting is just a really, really great arena to be in. You get a lot of unique projects that actually also weren't just solely strategy. So I was management consultant at Deloitte, then sort of that technology, media, and telecommunications bucket, and did a lot of projects in the transformation around kind of advertising and new business models. And I got really lucky because I had a lot more hands-on projects. So I did a lot of product management. I got to do launch of new projects. So sure, yes, a lot of strategy, beautiful PowerPoints, data analysis, all of the things that sort of fine tune both hard and soft skills. But I also really got to learn how to operate a business. And so the journey, to your question, from kind of that consulting arena to chief of staff at Xandr, actually good story, but it's not unlike many consultant supercom operators. I think what I find is unique is sort of the cast of characters and the time at which I did it, which was I was at Deloitte. I was leading a strategy project at AT&T for over a year at the time. It ended up being 2 full years at AT&T while with Deloitte. And I was focused on like how AT&T could drive synergies following the acquisition of Time Warner. And so it was a tough project, like many consulting engagements. I don't even actually think there were windows in our conference room. And I think I actually propped up my laptop on the wall of the cubicle because we didn't have enough cubicles to go around either. But I love the people on the project. I love the challenge. And I thought it was, it wasn't the first time a telco was attempting this type of metamorphosis to become a modern media company, but I really believed in the vision of the company. And so flash forward, AT&T ends up hiring Brian Lesser, took on a project to help him with his business case. And it was interesting because at the time, I think when he and I first met each other, he was sort of like, look, I really just like consultants. They're sort of all around AT&T and, it's just not my thing. And for me, I actually at the time never contemplated joining AT&T, never contemplated leaving consulting. I was actually very happy there. I loved the notion of the people are the products. I loved the variety of challenges that I had, and that sort of outside in advantage that you had. But I believed in the vision. I believed in Brian. He apparently liked me too, and quickly convinced me to move from San Francisco to New York, and from kind of a really, strong and growing career as a consultant to sort of an operator within Xandr. So my first role was a senior strategy role. And a couple of weeks in, Brian's just getting his foot as one of the CEOs reporting into the chairman at the time, Randall Stevenson. And every single CEO, and frankly, many executives across AT&T had this role called chief of staff. And so he was figuring out what that role was, but then very quickly kind of moved me into that role. And so that's really how it all came to be. So a unique project I was super passionate about, person who is sort of charged to lead a new business, and then sort of a lot of ambiguity around this role that was chief of staff and a little bit of trust. You jump, I jump, Jack, like, let's just figure this out together.
What do you think was the source of the connection that led you to work with Brian, or that made Brian want to recruit you? Because I think that when most people take significant leaps in their career, it is because someone with more power and influence than they have sees potential in them and elevates them. But how that happens is often opaque and difficult to describe. So I'm curious what your experience was there.
Yeah, I think first he's a listener. So he kind of views everyone in the room. And typically a lot of people just sort of like write off either consultants because they're from the outside. I mean, frankly, a lot of times people write off women, especially in sort of male dominated fields like technology. He kind of always was just like peeling back the layers. Like, you said that one thing that one time was very interesting. Like, can we double click into that? And so I think first and foremost, he just heard me and like really gave me a platform to speak. And then to my own credit, like, I think I really knew what I was talking about. I saw AT&T for all of its glory and warts. And, I knew kind of the folks who were going to support him or be a little bit more challenging. And so I knew the ropes around the organization. And I think on sort of the Brian end, and you'll have to bring him on the pod to get his version of this, I think I was very honest with him. So I guess the origin of that sort of, partnership was just honesty, and sort of effective communication between the two of us. Because I think him getting dropped in as an external person, as a CEO, and kind of managing immediately a couple businesses with the promise of acquiring others, I think everyone kind of pays lip service and tells you what you want to hear. And I saw that as a trend in consulting at many large organizations. I call it like emperor has no clothes, and no one really is getting the hard facts or, looking at the details. And I made it a point to be honest with him, and I knew my stuff.
What does a chief of staff do, I guess, like broadly, and then specifically with the remit that you ended up taking on at AT&T?
It's funny that you asked me that, and I knew we were going to talk about chief of staff, which is a near and dear and frankly not talked about enough topic. But I'm actually rewatching House of Cards right now. Do either of you watch it, or did you watch it when it was out?
I watched it at the time. Yeah.
I mean, with politics right now, it's like actually really just fun to revisit. the fiction and how real some of it could be. But I can tell you as a starter for this, that it was not what Frank Underwood's chief of staff, Doug Stamper, would do. He actually like buried bodies and did a lot of very illegal things.
Only metaphorically.
Yeah, and I forgot how dark that show gets. But I think the role, said as simply as I can, I think it's bringing out the best in the CEO to bring out the best in the business. And so, I think it's important to think about the role because it does vary in terms of what you do, whether you're at a massive company that's, been around for 100 years or whether you're at a scaling company like InfoSum. I think the measuring, the yardstick I would put on, like, are you a good chief of staff? Are you not? Are you doing a good job? Is if the CEO ratings are high, if the business is performing well, and then if folks across the organization have sort of tangible understanding of the value that you bring and the impact that you make, because it's always going to vary day to day. And then the specific examples of what that could be, it could, and at Xandr in particular, we had a lot of executives. So we had someone to do everything. And then we acquired AppNexus, and then you had even two of someone to do everything. We sort of had no shortage of folks leading functions. I think what Brian really needed and what I was helpful in doing is sort of just alignment, like strategic initiatives where it was a little bit of this team and a little bit of that team. And you kind of have to like drive collaboration and pull something together. I had more of that background in strategy and some M&A experience. So I happened to lean a lot into the work on some of the deals that we did. There's so much just on communication. So you have to constantly think about the audiences that a CEO is caring for. So that's investors, that's employees, that's clients in the market. And so you're always trying to streamline those communication channels, which I found to be probably one of the most helpful things. Like, you're really partnered with your kind of comms team. And that was a huge learning for me and something that I now really value and have valued in my career. So it can be a range of things in terms of what you do. And some of that just depends on what you're doing as a company. We at Xandr, we're standing up a brand new business. We were acquiring technology. One project I did was totally revamp what was the legacy AppNexus offices in Flatiron and just all of the offices across the globe for a look and feel that felt more Xandr and representative of the culture. So like, I managed construction teams and architects and a range of things. And that's because there just wasn't someone who had that sort of, capacity and role and sort of focus. So you kind of take on a lot of the things where there are gaps, you facilitate across teams, and then you're always just the sounding board to the CEO.
Given that you're talking about teams and, massive projects like M&A, is there a company size or stage that you think a chief of staff is most appropriate for, or the company can benefit most from?
Yes, immediately off the bat, a company like AT&T. But the one caution I would say, so I'd say large, complex organizations, it is great if you have a chief of staff, especially if you have multiple business units that either have the title CEO or general manager or whatever, president, whatever you call it. I think the challenge with that, though, and what I see a bad habit that really large companies, and I saw this at AT&T, is everyone wants a chief of staff. And so they see the value that a chief of staff brings the CEO, and then all of a sudden your head of product wants a chief of staff and your CRO wants a chief of staff. And then all of a sudden you kind of are creating just like a lot of waste and sort of fat and layers within the organization. But then sometimes it's starting to take away from some of the functions that already exist if you're a large enough entity. So if you're a large complex organization, you already have a marketing team and a comms team and probably an internal comms team. You have HR, you have strategy and operations. And so I think it's really necessary for someone in sort of that CEO level role to have a chief of staff, especially in large organizations. Like, to me, that's a must. Be careful that you don't have too many of them across every single C-suite role. But I also think people assume it's only for big companies. And as a testament to how critical I think the role is, one of the first things I've done in, my tenure as CEO, which is only, I think give or take a month, maybe less than that, is I've kind of moved someone into that role of chief of staff because I value it, because I think it's what I need to be successful. I think it's what the business needs to be successful in this new chapter. And so I think scaling organizations, probably not, seed or series A companies like out the gate need a chief of staff. I think your investors would look at you with like a little bit of a side eye. But those who are really trying to kind of hit the next level of growth or hit profitability or sort of move into new regions, and there's so many moving parts and there's new teams and sort of, especially if the pace of the industry, is accelerating, I think a chief of staff can be incredibly effective.
I think one way to think about it, and I'm curious what you think of this as someone who's held both roles, is like a chief of staff might be an interesting role for someone who's maybe a little earlier in their career and maybe not quite ready to be like a COO, but who really understands the industry, sort of has instincts for business, and is a perspective that as the CEO you want in the room a lot. But again, they're maybe just not ready for the traditional role of someone who would be in the room with the CEO all the time, which is like a COO.
Yeah, I totally think that's right. I mean, I think every COO should basically have almost every capability that a CEO has. And I think it'd be misleading and wrong to say that every chief of staff has every capability to step into the COO or the CEO role. And now, add on, I think traditionally when you're just like, where do I even start? I want to hire a chief of staff. One, like there's like this phenomenon around that role. So like there's like organizations and alliances. If you go on LinkedIn, there's ever since I was in the role, like I get asked all the time, like, please speak at this place or, talk about this role or help feed into this playbook as to, it's like everyone's capitalizing on it literally and monetizing the art of like finding the chief of staff and making the chief of staff role successful, which is clever. But I think, someone with a consulting background, someone who has seen different teams, like if you've only done one thing and you have one purview and that's it, like you're probably not going to be the best and most effective chief of staff. You kind of want someone who's used to managing ambiguity. I think that would probably be like top of my list. Like, can this person manage ambiguity? Can they effectively communicate what they're recommending? Like a COO needs that and a chief of staff equally needs that. Like if you're making recommendations, if you're sort of leading a project, listening to all the voices, and then you can't communicate like what someone's going to do when a CEO has a million things going on, like then that's not an effective chief of staff. So I'd say that that's the other thing that's really, really important.
So how did your day-to-day and responsibilities then change from going from chief of staff to COO at InfoSum?
So many things. I would say mostly the scale and maturity of the businesses are just so different. Xandr was a $3 billion business at the time that I was there. For context, it sat within the umbrella of AT&T, which is a Fortune 10 company. And, as I mentioned before, at Xandr, there's just an executive to run all core pieces of the business. And so you were a facilitator and enabler. You're definitely a sounding board to the CEO. InfoSum is not a $3 billion business just yet. We're venture backed, we're scaling. But as COO, I managed a lot of the core functions like day one of stepping into that role from the very beginning. And that meant that I designed it, I developed it. I, in some instances, like scaled it to then hand it to another executive, or in other instances sort of kept it close. So I'd say that sort of like the context, I think, is really relevant and important to the nuances of the role. I would say as COO, you're just always selling, especially at like our scale and our time. And maybe that was actually surprising to me, to ABC always be closing, Glenn Murray style. I got to work on a lot of those strategic deals and acquisitions and a lot of, really important partnerships at Xandr. And so I was, client facing to an extent, but I just wasn't sort of like day to day the voice of Xandr for this product or for what we were trying to achieve. I was a lot more behind the scenes as chief of staff. There was somebody who could kind of be out in front of the market or in front of clients. And actually remember, and this is sort of a harrowing experience, we did this thing at Xandr, it's called the Relevance Conference. And it was sort of when we unleashed the brand and we brought people from all over the industry. And it was in Santa Barbara, so it was sort of amazing. But we did this sort of custom research, kind of consumer insights as to how they're consuming television, how they feel about advertising. And we had this great business intelligence team that did it. And, there's someone who like represented the research who was like, oh, Lauren's such a great speaker. Like she should go on stage and represent this research. So I got like a little, it was truly like 10-minute speaking gig to represent some of the data. There was this executive at AT&T who had been there for a very long time. And And he was like, what is a chief of staff doing on stage? And I'll never forget just how motivating that was to me, to think that like someone's title and, and what they're capable of was just sort of, was limited at all just because of, what someone deemed a chief of staff. And clearly this person treated his chief of staff like it was, a glorified, administrative assistant that could easily be in today's world replaced by AI and not a strategic partner. And I think that's a massive difference I see all the time between how people can treat chiefs of staff and how valuable it is. But as COO, back to sort of the original nuances of that role at Xandr and my time at InfoSum, like I'm selling a lot more. I'm out in the market. I'm, a voice representing our clients, a voice representing our product. I definitely had to dial that up, jumping from, one role to the other.
Yeah, it's also sort of like an enterprise / incumbent versus a challenger role where you have to be, I mean, everyone should be evangelizing, but obviously if you're coming from that challenger position, it's especially urgent to do so. I would also point out that the through line from, chief of staff to COO to COO and what you in particular bring to those three roles is, I think, of an inability to communicate. Like, no doubt there are several dimensions to it, but in order to get elevated by Brian in the first place, you had to have a sort of philosophy and a way of seeing the business and then be able to articulate it. And that's something I'm constantly looking for in people is just like, do you have a philosophy? Like, are you sort of, I see this, and obviously my domain is marketing, right? So I see it a lot like with marketers, it's like sort of going through the motions of like, and now we're going to email the reporters and we're going to put out the content and whatever. And it's like, well, yes, like those are the tactics, but also like stepping back a second, like, how do we win? Like, how does marketing help the entire organization win? And how do we figure out what we're going to do based on what the high level problems are? And then the ways that marketing has the tools to address them.
I totally agree. I also think as chief of staff, as sort of the breadcrumbs leading to a role as more of a spokesperson and communicating just more regularly, like I had to do a lot of that work. So I think when people, especially at really big companies, and this isn't the standard, this is, there's always exceptions to this. But I think sometimes they get their talking points and then they're like robots. And it's like, this is what I say, these are the bullets. But like as chief of staff, I had to think about the audience and think about stepping in Brian's shoes and think about his voice, which by the way, his voice is different than mine. Like I like more adverbs and descriptions and storytelling. And he's like very to the point and brilliant at it and has such an extensive vocabulary. Like, like one, I'm thinking in his shoes, but I had to sort of craft that message. And the art of crafting the message is something that even when I have brilliant comms, resources around me, like it makes me a better, more effective partner in crafting what ends up being the better result, like what ends up being the better story that we're telling. And to what you just said about sort of where InfoSum is today, like it's so needed. Like, I mean, think about the noise of the market that we're in, and you constantly have to sort of silence that noise and be very clear. And I think it's something that really, really charges us forward.
Part of the reason I wanted to have you on and structure this episode the way we have is to cover the non-founder path to CEO. So I think especially in tech, when we talk about CEOs, we're usually talking about founder CEOs, the classic, Silicon Valley story and that whole thing. So I think you've limbed one way to become a CEO as a non-founder, which is sort of having a strategy / operations perspective, because those are holistic functions. And then basically you get in front of the CEO, they believe in you and they elevate you. So you could talk a little bit more about that and generalize it. But also I wanted to ask, do you see the path for people who do come from a more particular function, whatever, sales, marketing, product, whatever it is, if it's not your path, which is that sort of holistic view of the business, how do you think people get that broader range of skills that then allows them to be a COO or CEO?
Yeah, I do think there are more traditional routes. And I do think it comes to like breadth and depth of experience and multiple experiences. Consulting can give you that. Consulting can let you, see a bunch of different businesses, tackle a bunch of problems, see a different amount of styles, frankly, in leadership and communication, and just being effective. And I think it's important to say, I just don't think you can kind of come from anywhere. Like, I don't think like, the sort of probably the answer everyone wants me to give is like, you can do it. Anyone can do it. Like, I just don't think that that's the case. For example, if you're like the greatest seller or you're the greatest within legal, or even if you're in a more operational role, like you're great at client service, but that is all that you have done day in, day out, and you don't have P&L management and you don't have setting strategic vision and strategic planning experience, and frankly, some financial acumen, like you're probably not well suited to be a chief operating officer and then eventually a chief executive. Like and that's not a never, that's just like, you kind of need to step into a different role, gain a few more skills and have a little bit more experience before you sort of take that jump. So I definitely think that there's always a route. I get, folks, I'm one of those people that if people reach out to me on LinkedIn for career stuff, like I do always respond. It may not be that day, but I will end up having contact with that person and help people sort things out or connect them to someone who can on my behalf. And that's the advice I give to someone. If they're just like, hey, I've only done this one thing, but I really want to be a strategist, or I really want to be a chief operating officer, and I really want to do this. It's like, okay, you might have to take a lower level role, or you might need, some courses, or you might need to shape your resume in such a way that you're displaying that you have, and there's always different ways to do it. You could take nonprofit experience. You could, you could showcase it in other ways. It doesn't just have to be sort of the formal way of like, I got this title and this role and sort of that catapulted me. I mean, it's interesting at InfoSum because we also had a CEO who wasn't a founder, and I listened to all your podcasts and I love the different strengths you kind of draw on them. And I really agree with it, which is to say, everyone needs that sort of that start, the seed, the genius that is the founder who takes it from 0 to 1, who invests, the idea, but the resiliency to sort of, get the funding and see something come to life. But I really also think that discipline and experience and almost just like level-headed, I think it's what you said, sort of perspective that comes from being someone who's just like scaled an organization in a different land and doesn't have maybe the possessive nature that a founder would have on something. I think that's really, really important. And yeah, and I think someone who has just been experienced through the organization and frankly has seen all chapters of it, I also think is very equipped to step into the CEO role. And I think my story is special because I was a client and then I was an investor. I sat in a corp dev seat. I led an investment in InfoSum. I was president, I was chief operating officer. And I think it's a powerful story of just what experience can bring to the table and what will be different from, say, the founder and then Brian and then me. Like, I've been in it with the teams and with our clients. And I think, you'll really start to see that come to life in a unique and interesting way. And at a time when we also have all eyes on us because the industry is ripe and ready to embrace us. So it's a good timing and an energizing moment, not just for me personally, but I think for our teams and for the industry.
Well said. How long have you been CEO now?
Just under a month.
Just under a month. So what's changed in the past month for you?
A lot of paperwork. I think I'm like really officially over every region, but every day has been like a new wedding to this and, apostle that and notarize that. And just a lot of admin and printing, and tree killing and all of that. But jokes aside, I am using it just as an opportunity to drive some changes that even maybe if Brian was still here, he would have done. And so you have to take any moment of change, I think, and use it to just fire people up and get them excited. And so it's kind of coming out in a couple different ways. There's some operational changes we're making. That can just be in meeting cadence and how we're approaching meetings, which by the way, I think every executive and every company needs to look at on a regular basis because it's either working or it's not. And if it's not, then you definitely got to cut the meeting and give people time back and let people focus. So that's always refreshing. Summer is the best time to do that. This sort of organizational change is the best time to do that. Digging into certain initiatives that I think, we might have otherwise either kicked down the road or not looked at. That's really important. Changing my communication. So I have 3 really critical audiences. I have my investors, I have my employees, and I have clients, which obviously represent the market more broadly, and figuring out my cadence, like what's the best communication that they want. So using an opportunity to get feedback, like, were we communicating enough? Even though I was obviously like just as guilty if it wasn't enough or was too much alongside Brian, because we were both leading the company. It's a good opportunity to just hear people's perspective and set some changes. And then you'll appreciate this, Joe. I've been really hard at work on just positioning and just the language that we use around how our product is differentiated, which aligns to some exciting partnerships and some announcements that will be coming out soon, that were already underway, but just using that as also, like, I internally call it the InfoSum 3.0 narrative, which is energizing to the org. And again, back to those audiences, energizing to the org, energizing to investors, who are coming back into the business and looking to invest more in the business, which is exciting, and to the market, who I think, again, is just a little bit more open eyes and open ears on this new category that's been completely confusing for a lot of people, but is at a time of maturity where, like, there's real proof points on the board and there's real clients who are utilizing it. And I think it's much more mature. And I think the bad sort of communication and chaos is really giving it.
Lauren, something you and I have discussed and that's notable about your approach to corporate leadership is that you're not afraid to participate in the discourse and to call out your competitors and articulate why you're different and why people should care. As a marketer, of course, I love that. And I wish people would be clearer about that, because I think often leaders make the mistake of not differentiating themselves. And then you're leaving it up to your competitors to define your market and explain why they're better than you and sort of shape the conversation on their own terms. To that end, I wanted to ask two things. One is, like, how you think about that in terms of the risk reward, like why you're willing to take that stand publicly, where I think a lot of others shy away from it. And then two, to tell us a bit about the category, which you were just referring to, and how you see it.
Yeah. First, I will say, if I make it look easy, it's not easy to me, because I really do I think about, obviously the brand of InfoSum, the what I'm representing, which is, it's just bigger than Lauren and what Lauren's going to tweet, at 1:38 on a Wednesday. And so I struggle sometimes, and I read things very diligently and I think about it before. And I think that's the most important thing you do, is you just don't, I know the feedback you've given to executives before, which is sometimes people over rotate on that. They overthink. And then as a result, they're not really clear and they don't stand for something. And so I think first you need to think about it, but you also need to be decisive. I would say the second thing is, if you, like I do, feel incredibly passionate about what you're doing and you genuinely believe in it and you genuinely know it and you spend the time to know it and you spend the time to listen to your client, like no tweet's going to fail. Like, you did your homework. Like, I'm not a careless person. I'm not a thoughtless person. Like, I think and empathize about, like, how people are going to react to this and how they're going to think about it. And frankly, if I call somebody out on something like I have in the past, like, I'm very ready at any moment for them to engage with me and for me to have a very productive conversation. And I wouldn't ever say anything and communicate anything where I couldn't back it up with that feeling and couldn't back it up with that strength. Now, to the industry that we're in, we're disrupting something that's broken. Like, the infrastructure that propped up how people handle data, so that a bunch of companies are capitalizing, making money off of data that you as a consumer, like, didn't really realize was, like, middleware involved at all, because it was some fine print. Like, that just needs to stop. And frankly, in a lot of markets, it has. And so, the mission that we're on of totally re-architecting and rebuilding is a very important mission, and it takes a lot of work. And so the challenge and the chaos I see is when people are trying to shortcut that, and when people are not doing the hard work, and when people are, doing something that's like just skirting the rules, but not really in the best interest of the consumer and not really transforming things. That's where I think it's disingenuous to the sort of efforts and the initiative. And frankly, with the category that we have now helped define is really trying to stand for. This data collaboration category, this privacy enhancing technology category, this label of privacy first when something isn't privacy at all. And it's very difficult when a company has lived and breathed a totally different business model. Like, what is my core business? It is data collaboration. First, second, third. It is privacy protection. First, second, third. Like, it is that. Like, that is my business. And for other companies to sort of approach it like it's a feature add-on, number one, I think it complicates what ends up needing to exist as interoperability across collaboration. You know, if you're a cloud provider and your technology forces you and your partners to all use that one cloud, like that's not good for collaboration. Why are you dictating your partner's data infrastructure? Like, you shouldn't have to. Are you pushing people to use your identity spine because you've homegrown built that identity spine and you think it's very valuable and that's how you make your money? And it is limiting the sort of keys and sort of the identity resolution that needs to exist in the market. Like, you know, I think that neutrality, being agnostic and being independent, which frankly, I think InfoSum is really one of the only providers who can say that. I think it's what it's going to take for this industry to sort of adopt this new way of working and actually be able to scale. And obviously, it also takes partnership, which half of the people I'm usually calling out, like, should be partners. And they're trying to resist because they're trying to reinvent themselves. And they will give in to being a really great partner. And I'll be a really great partner back.
We should coin the term data coercion as a barb against the cloud providers that are trying to use their supposed data collaboration technology to force you to use their cloud or their infrastructure. I like that as a distinction.
I'm laughing. This is an audio podcast, so you can't see me laughing. I'm laughing because of how much of an actual silent killer Lauren is. You just, had like this great articulation of the future. And then at some point you said, and they will comply because I'm just like, yikes. That's amazing.
Well, I think really what you're doing to just make the subtext text is you're differentiating from those cloud providers who might be providing some similar services, but then also from a certain data brokerage company that might be getting into the data collaboration space. And I think you're sort of using the term data collaboration, with which I do associate InfoSum, and I think of it as a category you guys have really pioneered and helped shape. You're using the term to push back on data brokerages that might be masquerading as data collaboration companies, but then also companies that might be participating in data collaboration, but also using it as a tool to push other aspects of their business, whereas this is the essence of your business. And I think that's a great example to just spell these things out in real time of how you use positioning to do what it's supposed to do, which is to differentiate you from competitors and galvanize customers, those who influence them, and investors, as you put it before.
Yeah, and they have a core business. They've got enough business to go around. Like, if you're selling storage, like that's a really good business right now. If you're selling data analytics tools, that's a very good business right now. If you have a data marketplace, that's a very good business right now. So it's also to say that all of those things can still exist. It's just, I think when it comes to collaboration, you shouldn't be dictating that for your partner. I think it's a blocker to really getting the industry going. And I think that I'm starting to see many more companies just like view it that way, see it that way, and start to ask the harder questions. Like, I think what's really inspiring to me is when I'm doing an RFP and early on, it's not just like a product manager who's like looking to move away from like an old data connectivity platform. They bring in their privacy teams and they bring in their data science teams, and they bring in their legal and compliance teams, and they're thinking about it from a security lens and they're thinking about it from a privacy lens. And when they do that, like, we win. Like, when they do that, and it's like, it seems like it's a more complicated sale, and maybe it actually is, we end up faring much better because of the diligence that goes into it, because then it's very difficult to conflate all these things. It's very difficult to deflate what is decentralized processing, which is innovative and new and a different way of doing something, to centralizing data and handing over control of data, which is a lot of how legacy systems operate, frankly. And you can't get away with it in Europe, which is, when people ask me, like, what are your biggest strengths in your business? I'm like, our technology. But you've said this before, Joe, Like, not everyone wants to hear it. Not everyone has the patience of like why your tech, smells better than the next technology. The second thing is Europe. Like in a time when everyone is fearing the next state legislation or what's to come, or frankly, just their consumers losing trust in them, which should be sort of front and center. The fact that we have these regulated companies in the most regulated markets using us for 3-4 years with success in their businesses without even needing to think about the ROI on their purchase of the InfoSum tech. Like, I don't know. I think that's pretty powerful.
You said something interesting a minute ago. You said, what I'm working on an RFP. How much time do you spend just with sales and marketing as a, kind of function of everything you're now doing as CEO?
I would say definitely more in the US because we're just a smaller shop in the US. And so I definitely am more front and center, I would say, because of just availability and because I'm here and because I care about the efficiency of our business and keeping cash. And then every time I'm often in Europe and visiting clients. But I would say it's more sales than I would have ever anticipated, sort of stepping in, as I said, like into the COO role. But a huge part of like the beauty of scaling and the beauty of like proving out different markets is then you get to invest in those markets. And then I can be like, once I'm starting to be more hands off and I'm less involved in sales, like that's really a sign that, the markets come around, that the clients are out selling for us. This is a network business. So my clients are my greatest evangelists of my technology. They bring their partners together. The model sets it up for everyone to be incentivized in that way. And so I think that's one of the really exciting things about the product, which not only allows me to take a little bit of a step back, the more success that we get, but frankly, it also allows, our sellers to kind of move on to the next category, or what I call Horizon 3, which is, shouldn't this technology do many things outside of marketing and advertising? Yes, it should. Like, marketing and advertising is the start, but there are so many use cases where two companies that need to collaborate and understand insights or understand an overlap of an audience, where that is relevant. Think about pharma and two companies looking to tackle, my husband works in healthcare, so I'll use his, like, hematology and a new therapy in hematology. Wouldn't it be great if those two very large companies could work together? I think of it all the time in sort of fraud and credit, and in sort of financial services more broadly. I think there's a lot of applications. So, the more that we kind of tackle and dominate and win in marketing and advertising, like, it's on to the next arena.
That's a big vision.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. Agreed?
Absolutely. Lauren, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both. I love the new podcast. I'm an avid listener, and thanks for having me. The first podcast as CEO, so thanks.
Yes. And if you all enjoyed this, please do us a favor. Smash that like button, smash the subscribe button,
Smash all
smash
of the
a
buttons.
keyboard, follow Lauren on X and on LinkedIn for more hot takes, and follow Joe.
Yeah, we'll keep them coming. We're keeping it spicy here. All right. We're not afraid to say stuff. That's what you want from your influencers.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, guys. This is awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thanks. Bye.